Somewhere between the asteroid belt of Crux Minor and the dead silence of open space, a sound came through the scanner that no one on the Dawnward bound had ever heard before. It was not an alarm. It was not static. It was something closer to grief. Remy was the one sitting at the console when it hit. He pulled off his headset so fast it clattered against the panel. Across the ship, 3 other crew members knocked over their drinks, pressed their palms against their ears, and said various things that were not polite. The ship's medic, Nala, was the first one to the scanner room. She was young, had been on the crew for only 4 months, and still had the habit of running toward problems instead of away from them. She read the data twice. Then she went to find the captain. Captain Osei was a man who had crossed 32 star systems, survived 2 hull breaches, and once negotiated with pirates using nothing but cold coffee and a very long stare. He looked at the scanner readout, looked at Nala, and said, "Is that a life sign?" "Multiple," she said, "but only one that's stable." The source was a Vorkai pod, small, angular, built for emergency escape. The Vorkai were a known species. Large, reptilian, ancient and proud in the way that very powerful things tend to be. They did not often lose pods. They did not often lose anything. This one had clearly been drifting for days. When the crew opened the pod in the cargo bay, Dora, the ship's navigator, a woman who had seen enough of the galaxy to stop being surprised by most of it, took one step inside and then stopped completely. The creature inside was the size of a large dog. Its scales were pale gold fading into violet at the edges, like something caught between sunrise and dusk. Its wings were folded tight against its back. Its eyes, large, amber, wet, were wide open and staring. Then it made the sound again. It was not loud exactly. It was deep. It moved through the floor of the ship, up through their boots, into their teeth. It was the sound of something very small that had been alone for a very long time. "It's a hatchling," Nala said, already crouching, already pulling up her scanner. "A Vorkai infant, barely weeks old." The other life signs in the pod had not survived the drift. Whatever had happened to the ship that launched this pod, the adults had not made it. The hatchling had. They brought it onto the ship. They set up a space in the cargo hold with everything Nala thought might help: warmth, soft materials, dim lighting. The hatchling sat in the middle of all of it and cried. It cried for 6 hours. The sound was devastating in a very specific way. It did not break things, though it came close. It vibrated the instrument panels. It made the overhead lights flicker. It gave every crew member a headache that settled right behind the eyes and stayed there. Dora ran 3 different translation programs. None of them could parse it. It was not language. It was just pain, expressed in frequencies that the human body received whether it wanted to or not. Nala tried food. The hatchling ignored it. She tried warmth adjustment, lighting adjustment, different textures on the floor. Nothing worked. By the time the ship hit the 3rd watch of the night cycle, most of the crew had given up and gone to sleep in their quarters with something pressed over their ears. Remy could not sleep. He never could when something was wrong. He went down to the cargo hold with a cup of tea he did not really want and sat on a crate a few meters from the hatchling and just stayed there. He was not trying to fix anything. He was just there. After a while, without thinking about it, he started to hum. It was an old song. Something his mother had sung to him when he was small and the world felt too large. He did not even remember all the words. He just hummed the shape of it, low and quiet, into the dark of the cargo hold. The hatchling stopped crying. It happened so suddenly that Remy stopped humming too, startled. The silence was enormous. Then, slowly, the hatchling lifted its head and looked at him. Not with fear. With something closer to recognition, the way a person looks when they hear their name called from across a crowded room. Remy started humming again. The hatchling blinked. It made a small sound, not the sub-frequency wail, something much softer, almost an echo of what he was doing. Then it curled its wings around itself, tucked its head down, and closed its eyes. Within 2 minutes, it was asleep. Remy sat very still for a long time. He looked at the small gold and violet creature breathing slowly in the cargo hold of a human freight ship, floating in the middle of deep space, and felt something he could not name settle in his chest. He kept humming until his tea went cold. In the morning, he told the crew what happened. Dora stared at him. Nala immediately started taking notes. Captain Osei looked at the sleeping hatchling for a long moment, then looked at Remy. "So," the captain said, We have a dragon that only sleeps when you sing. Seems like it, Remy said. Osei nodded slowly. Right. He picked up his coffee. Nobody tell anyone about this yet. Nobody did. Not yet. But the hatchling slept, warm and quiet, and the dawnward bound kept moving through the dark. The hatchling chose her own name on the 14th day. It happened by accident. Nala was reading aloud from her research notes, something about Vorkai resonance biology, and she said the word lyra, which was a term in the old Vorkai lexicon meaning something close to the first sound a thing makes. The hatchling, who had been half asleep draped across a cargo crate, lifted her head and made a short, clear sound. Not the wail. A chirp, like a bell struck once. Did she just? Dora started. Lyra, Nala said again, carefully. The chirp again. And then the hatchling stood up, walked over to Nala, and pressed the flat of her golden snout against Nala's hand. That was that. Her name was Lyra. By the end of the second week, the crew had organized what Dora called, without any humor at all, the singing schedule. Someone had to be with Lyra during sleep cycles. It had been tested. Without a human voice humming or singing, or in some cases just talking softly nearby, she would wake within minutes and begin the wailing that made instrument panels tremble. Dora herself took the early morning watch. She did not sing. She recited navigation coordinates in a low, rhythmic voice, the way she had done alone on long solo flights. It worked. She chose not to examine why. Captain Osei took the midnight watch 3 times before anyone caught him doing it. He was found sitting on the floor of the cargo hold, back against the wall, reading aloud from an old collection of poems he kept on a small personal reader. He had not told anyone he owned it. He did not discuss it afterward. Remy, who had started all of this, was still the best at it. He had a real musician's memory. He could hum for an hour without repeating himself, pulling songs from everywhere. Old folk music, children's lullabies, half-remembered film scores. Lyra would press close to him during his watch and sleep so deeply the whole cargo hold felt quieter than space. Nala spent less time singing and more time studying. She had been sending research queries to every xenobiology database she could access, and what she found was making her very still in the way she got when something alarmed her. She called the crew together on the 16th day. Her resonance organs, she said, pulling up a diagram on the wall screen. The soft internal structures that Vorkai used to communicate, to navigate, and eventually to produce plasma discharge, are developing around the frequency of human music. Nobody spoke. This isn't unusual for hatchlings in general, she continued. Vorkai young imprint on the sound patterns of whoever raises them. It shapes their biology at the organ level, their communication range, their precision, their eventual power output. All of it forms in the first months around the sounds they hear most. And Lyra has been hearing us, Doris said. Constantly. For 2 weeks. Remy looked at Lyra, who was currently trying to fit her head under his arm. She was getting bigger. Her scales caught the cargo bay light and scattered it across the walls in small gold and violet pieces. Is that bad for her? He asked. Nala hesitated. I don't know. It's never happened before. There's no data. But her resonance organ development is already outside any chart I can find. The complexity of the patterns forming, she paused. It should not be possible in an infant this young. There was a silence. Then the ship's proximity alarm went off. The Vorkai warship was enormous the way mountains are enormous. Not just big, but old big, the kind of size that suggested it had outlasted several civilizations just by sitting still. It came out of near light travel and simply appeared off the port side, and every human on the dawnward bound felt their stomach drop at the same moment. The communication channel opened before anyone asked it to. The commander on screen was a Vorkai elder, tall, deep-scaled and dark teal, with the slow, deliberate movement of someone who had never needed to hurry. His name, translated roughly, was Dravos. His expression was unreadable, which was worse than any readable expression. You are carrying a Vorkai hatchling, Dravos said. It was not a question. We rescued her, Captain Osei said, in his best unmovable voice. From a drifting pod. We are transporting her safely. You will transfer her to us now. In the cargo hold, something changed. Later, none of them could explain exactly how they knew. Perhaps it was the vibration that started in the floor, very low, very controlled. Lyra had heard the Vorkai voice through the ship's speakers. She was awake. She was standing. Her wings, still small but already strong, were spread slightly. And then she made a sound no one expected. It was not the grief wail. It was directed, focused, sharp as a tool. It went through the hull and into the transmission channel. On the warship's bridge, every instrument spiked at once. Dravos took one involuntary step backward. The channel stayed open. Everyone waited. When Dravos spoke again, his voice was measured, but something beneath it had shifted. That level of focused resonance, he said slowly, from a hatchling of this age, is not possible. She's also very attached, Remy said from the cargo bay doorway, since no one had told him not to speak. Dravos looked at him for a long moment. Then back at Osei. You will accompany us to the homeworld. The hatchling will be evaluated by our scholars. Osei glanced at his crew. Dora gave him a look that said we do not have a choice. Nala was already quietly writing notes. Remy was letting Lyra press her head against his shoulder. All right, Osei said. We'll come. He did not say, we are not leaving her. He did not have to. The crew already knew. And somehow, Lyra already knew too. She folded her wings, tucked herself against Remy's side, and closed her eyes. The ship moved, following the warship into the dark. And Remy hummed, quietly, the whole way. The Vorkai home station was a ring. Ancient metal and carved stone rotating slowly around a pale gas giant, lit from below by reflected amber light. It looked like something that had been built for 1,000 years and then kept going out of habit. The Dawnward Bound was given a docking bay that was clean, large, and very clearly designed to keep them in one place. The crew walked out into corridors that were 3 times taller than they needed to be, and Lyra walked with them, not caged, not restrained. Dravos had made no move to take her. He watched her, instead, the way someone watches a fire that is behaving in an unexpected direction. She was bigger now. Somewhere during the 3-day journey, she had grown, not enormously, but noticeably. Her wings, folded against her back, reached higher. Her steps made soft sounds on the stone floor. She walked between Remy and Nala and looked at everything with wide amber eyes. The Vorkai scholars were already waiting. There were 7 of them, in long observation robes, arranged in a careful semi-circle inside a chamber that smelled like old mineral and time. They did not greet the humans. They looked at Lyra with an intensity that had no warmth in it. Not cruel, just entirely scientific, the way a geologist looks at a stone formation. The lead scholar, whose name translated approximately to Saren, ran a full biological scan in less than 2 minutes. He read the results without moving his face. Then he read them again. Then he passed the data to the scholar beside him, who read it and made a very quiet sound. Her resonance organs, Saren said, finally, are developing in a pattern we have no record of. We know, Nala said. Saren looked at her. You know, I've been documenting it for 2 weeks. I can share my data if it helps. The scholars exchanged looks that were very fast and very full. Saren nodded, once. There was a long period of examination after that. Lyra tolerated it with remarkable patience, sitting still while instruments were held near her, responding to tone tests by tilting her head and occasionally mimicking the sound back at a different pitch. The scholars grew more still with every test. Then one of them, younger, which on a Vorkai meant only slightly less ancient, said in a careful voice that the translation program rendered as this may represent contamination of developmental pathways through unauthorized interspecies exposure, and the room shifted. The word contamination was not a neutral word. Even the translation made it feel like an accusation. A different voice spoke from the doorway behind them. Old, deliberate, the kind of voice that did not raise itself because it had never needed to. Or, said Elder Sovereign, walking slowly into the chamber with a carved staff that looked older than the station itself, it represents something we do not yet have the language for. Sovereign was the oldest member of the Vorkai Council, ancient in a way that felt geological. He crossed the room and stood before Lyra and looked at her for a long time without speaking. Lyra looked back. Then she made a small sound, soft, questioning, the same chirp she used when she encountered something new and interesting. Something moved in Sovereign's expression. It was small and it was gone quickly, but Remy saw it. Show me, Sovereign said, turning to the humans. What you do, what you have been doing with her. The scholars shifted uncomfortably. Dravos, standing at the side of the room, said nothing. Remy looked at Captain Osei. Osei nodded. So Remy sat down on the stone floor of an ancient alien council chamber, and he sang. He chose a simple one, an old song about water and distance, something his grandmother had known. His voice was not extraordinary. He was a ship engineer who happened to carry music around the way some people carry tools. He sang it plainly, without performance, because that was the only way he knew how. The chamber went absolutely silent. The Vorkai scholars, who communicated in precise frequencies and had spent centuries perfecting resonance language, heard something they had no category for. It was not efficient. It did not carry technical data. It had no fixed meaning. And yet it organized itself, rose and fell, repeated with variation, created expectation and then answered it differently. It was structured chaos. It was information wrapped in feeling. 3 of the scholars had stopped breathing. Lyra had closed her eyes. She was swaying very slightly. And then she began to sing with him. Not the same melody. Something woven around it, underneath and above it at the same time. Her voice was not human and not purely Vorkai. It was something built from both, the way a river is built from the rain and the stone it crosses. It filled the chamber. It found the resonant frequency of the old metal walls and set them ringing softly, like the inside of a bell. The chamber rang for a long time after they both stopped. Sovereign stood very still. There was moisture at the corners of his eyes, not tears in the human way, but a slow release of pressurized vapor that the Vorkai experienced in moments of overwhelming input. He made no move to hide it. She did not mimic you, he said at last. She harmonized. Yes, Remy said. She built a second voice to complete what yours began. She does that sometimes. Sovereign turned to the scholars. His voice, when he spoke to them, was quiet and absolute. She is not contaminated. She is not broken. She is the first of something we do not have a name for yet. He paused. We will find one. The younger scholar who had said contamination opened his mouth. Sovereign looked at him. The scholar closed his mouth. Outside, the gas giant turned slowly in the amber light. Inside, Lyra pressed against Remy's side, warm and calm, and breathed the long, easy breaths of a creature that knows it is safe. The crew did not know yet what came next, but for the first time since the warship appeared off their port side, they felt the ground beneath them hold. 4 months passed on the station, and Lyra grew the way young things grow when they are well fed and loved. Faster than expected, more fully than planned. She was horse-sized now. Her wingspan, when she stretched, touched both walls of the cargo bay. Her voice, when she chose to use it, was layered in a way that made first-time listeners check if there was someone else in the room. There never was. It was just Lyra, carrying several tones at once the way a river carries everything that ever fell into it. The Vorkai scholars came every day to observe and measure and argue with each other. 3 linguists arrived from the Pelin Collective. A biologist from a species so old that her travel chair did most of her living for her. A communications theorist from the Inari trade routes who had been studying interspecies language for 60 years and said, within his first hour of meeting Lyra, that everything he had written was now incomplete. Remy kept teaching her songs. Simple ones, complicated ones, songs and languages he barely spoke himself. Lyra learned them in the way she did everything, by taking them apart and putting them back together slightly differently, the way a very good chef tastes a dish and then makes it better without being able to explain exactly how. Nala noticed something first, because Nala noticed everything first. She's not just singing, Nala told the crew one evening, spreading her notes across the mess table. She's encoding. She pulled up 2 files. The first was an audio recording of Lyra singing, something she had composed herself, a piece that had no name. The second was a data transcription, Vorkai resonance language, stripped down to its base information content. They matched. She's putting Vorkai data inside human melody, Nala said. The resonance precision is inside the music. You can receive it either way. If you're Vorkai, you hear the data. If you're human, you hear the song. But if you're both, you get everything. Dora stared at the files for a long time. She invented a new language. She didn't invent it on purpose, Remy said. It doesn't matter, Dora said. She did it. The communications theorist, when told, sat down heavily and did not speak for several minutes. Then he said it was the most significant development in cross-species linguistics in recorded history. He said this very quietly, as if saying it loudly might make it untrue. The scholars named it harmonic encoding. The name was accurate but bloodless. What Lyra was doing felt like more than a system. It felt like something that had always been waiting to exist, needing only a creature who was built from two different worlds at once. It was also, as Dora was the first to say plainly, a threat to a number of people who preferred that worlds stay separate. The trouble came from a council member named Breck. He was not ancient like Sovereign. He was middle-aged by Vorkai standards, which meant he had been powerful long enough to be comfortable with it and not long enough to have stopped caring about the comfort. He had been quiet during the early scholarly discussions. He had watched. He had gathered. He filed the petition on a Tuesday, which no one on the crew knew was a significant day in Vorkai political cycles, but Dravos did, and Dravos went very still when he heard about it. The petition argued that Lyra was a cross-species developmental anomaly, that the humans aboard the Dawnward Bound had, negligently or otherwise, altered a Vorkai citizen's biological development through unsanctioned cultural exposure, that Lyra's legal standing as a Vorkai should be suspended pending review, that the crew should be expelled. It was careful language. It said none of the things Breck actually meant, which was that human music had spread into Vorkai halls and human games had spread into Vorkai youth quarters, and something that should have been contained to one small cargo ship had instead become a research station full of foreign scholars, and it needed to stop. Captain Osei read the petition twice. Then he passed it to Dora. Dora read it once, then turned to her star charts the way she always did when she needed to think. She mapped the political systems the way she mapped travel routes, looking for the fastest path between 2 points. If this goes to the Galactic Assembly, she said finally, they have to hear it. And if they hear it, the vote could go either way. There are a lot of species who've been nervous about human cultural spread. Can we fight it? Nala asked. Not with arguments, Doris said. Breck's document is airtight. He wrote it carefully. She paused. But arguments aren't what we have. Everyone looked at Lyra, who was in the corner of the room constructing something out of a pile of metal rings she had found somewhere and was not explaining. She should go to the assembly herself, Doris said. Let them hear what they're calling an anomaly. Osei said, they will never allow a hatchling to address the assembly. She's not a hatchling anymore, Remy said. He was right. She wasn't. The creature in the corner of the room setting metal rings into a careful spiral pattern was something new, something the galaxy had not seen. The assembly had rules about many things, but it had no rule about her, because she had not existed until now. Dora sent the formal request that night. It was politely worded. It cited 17 procedural precedents. It requested that the subject of the petition be permitted to speak. The assembly's response came back in 4 days. It was grudging, conditional, limited to 30 seconds of address time, and hedged with enough qualifications to fill a small library. But it was yes. Lyra, when told, lifted her head from her metal rings and made a sound the translation program had never heard before. Nala ran the analysis later and found it was 2 things at once. A Vorkai affirmation, precise and formal, and a human melody, specifically the first 4 notes of the song Remy had hummed the very first night, in the dark of the cargo hold, when she had been small and afraid and alone. She remembered. Of course she remembered. It had been the first sound that ever made the universe feel safe. The Galactic Assembly Station did not try to be beautiful. It had been built by committee across 6 centuries, and it showed. Corridors bolted onto corridors, chambers added where there had been space, translation nodes wired through walls like the roots of an old tree that had grown around whatever was already there. It worked. It was not meant to impress. It was meant to last. The hearing chamber could hold 400 observers, and it was full. Remy had not expected that. He had expected a formal room with some officials and a lot of paperwork energy. Instead, every seat was taken by a different shape of being, tall, short, fluid, crystalline, still, constantly moving. They had all come because the filing had gone public 3 days earlier, and the word had spread the way significant words do, faster than anyone planned. The crew sat in the gallery. They had been told to stay there, to not speak, to not interfere. Captain Osei sat very straight. Nala had her notes. Dora watched the room the way she watched star systems, cataloging, calculating, looking for the safe path through. Remy watched Lyra. She stood on the floor of the chamber. There was no furniture that would have suited her. Gold and violet in the chamber's white light. Her wings folded, her tail still. She was larger than anything else in the room that was not a wall. She looked calm. She was not calm. Remy had known her long enough to read the very small signs. The slight tension in her wing joints, the way her tail tip moved in a tiny, controlled circle, the pattern of her breathing. She was afraid. She was doing it anyway. Breck presented first. He was precise and methodical and did not raise his voice once, which was more effective than shouting would have been. He described the situation as it had unfolded. A hatchling lost, recovered by humans, exposed to unsanctioned biological influence, now presented before the assembly as though that exposure were an achievement rather than a failure. He said words like integrity and protocol and developmental harm. He cited research. He cited precedent. He had done his work. Several ambassadors nodded. Not dramatically, just the small nods of people hearing something that confirmed what they had already been thinking. Then the assembly chair, a being who was mostly gesture and light, turned to Lyra and said, "The subject of the petition has been granted 30 seconds to respond." 30 seconds. The crew had known this going in. 30 seconds was the assembly's way of allowing something without actually allowing it. A formality, a courtesy with a lid on it. Lyra did not move for a moment. The chamber was quiet. Someone coughed. Someone else translated the cough into 2 different languages out of professional habit. Then she opened her mouth and sang. It began low, so low it was more feeling than sound, a vibration that moved through the floor and into the feet of everyone present. Then it rose. It built the way weather builds, not suddenly, but inevitably, each layer arriving before the last one had finished. The assembly chair reached toward the timer. The 30-second mark passed. The chair did not activate it. No one in the chamber moved. What Lyra sang was her life, not in a sentimental way, in a precise one. The opening was cold and formless, the resonance pattern of fear with nothing to organize around it, the sound of the drift. Then came the change, a new frequency, warm, irregular, human-shaped, imprecise in all the ways Vorkai communication was never imprecise. Remy's hum, the first night, rendered not as memory but as data, encoded in melody, available to every species present in whatever form they could receive it. The Vorkai delegates received it as resonance and felt the weight of it in their chest cavities. The Pellan linguists received it as music and found tears on their faces without having decided to cry. A species in the back row that communicated entirely through color began shifting through wavelengths they did not use in public, because they could not help it. An ambassador from a civilization that had not voluntarily felt anything in a formal setting for 200 years pressed one limb against the seat in front of her and held on. Lyra sang her first memory of cold, her first memory of warmth. She sang what it felt like to not know what you were, then to know, then to discover that the not knowing and the knowing could exist in the same body without tearing it apart. She sang the cargo hold, the crew, the song she had been given and the one she had made from them. She sang Sovereign's eyes filling with vapor. She sang the petition and the fear and the decision to come here anyway. 6 minutes passed. When she stopped, the chamber was absolutely silent for a long time. Then Sovereign, attending by long-range link, his image broadcast on the chamber's main screen, said, in Vorkai resonance that every translator present rendered faithfully. That is a description of what it means to grow. We have never heard it expressed before. The vote happened 90 minutes later, after arguments that felt very small compared to what had preceded them. The petition to classify Lyra as an anomaly and suspend her legal standing failed. It failed by a wide margin. What replaced it had never existed before, a category called interspecies cultural citizen, drafted in a hurry by 3 assembly lawyers who were clearly making it up as they went and equally clearly understood why they had to. Lyra was the first to receive it. 3 other pending cases, beings from different species who had existed in legal gray areas for years, were quietly reviewed and approved in the same session. No one announced it as a pattern. It was a pattern. In the gallery, the crew did not cheer. They were not the type. Ose let out a slow breath. Nala stopped writing and just sat for a moment. Dora recalculated several things in her head and found the numbers looked better than she had expected. Remy watched Lyra across the chamber floor, and found that she was already looking at him. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she made the small sound. The chirp. The bell struck once, the sound that had started as a name and grown into something more. He nodded. She turned back to face the chamber. Outside, the galaxy continued in all its noise and business and argument. But inside the chamber, the air was still ringing, faintly, in frequencies most instruments could barely catch, from a sound that had never existed before today. 2 years is a short time for a galaxy. It is a long time for a crew. The Dawnward Bound had been refitted, quietly, without ceremony, with funding that came from a source the Assembly's budget records listed only as cultural liaison infrastructure. New hull plating, larger cargo bay, a section in the back that was not quite a cabin and not quite a nest, but that Lyra used for sleeping, when she slept, which was still most reliably done with Remy nearby humming something old and shapeless into the dark. She filled the cargo bay now when she stretched. Gold and violet, both colors deeper than they had been, the kind of depth that comes not from age but from experience, from having been somewhere and returned. Her wingspan, fully open, was wider than the ship's original docking clearance, which had required modifications on 3 separate stations and one very long conversation with a Port Authority official who had clearly never expected to have this particular problem. She traveled with the crew because she chose to, and because her role, interspecies cultural liaison, the title still new enough that bureaucrats sometimes had to look it up, suited the kind of work the Dawnward Bound had always done, moving between places, carrying things that needed carrying. Remy never became famous. He did not want to be. His name appeared in Nala's published research in the acknowledgments, which he read once and did not mention again. He still fixed things on the ship when they broke, which they always did, and he still hummed while he worked. Lyra would sometimes harmonize from 3 rooms away, and the sound would move through the ship's walls like warm water. Nala's research won 4 awards from institutions whose names required pronunciation guides. She accepted each one by written message, because she was usually somewhere without a stable communications link, following a new thread. She had not stopped taking notes. She would not stop taking notes. There was simply too much to know. Dora kept navigating. She had added new routes to her charts, routes that now included Vorkai space, Pelin space, and 7 other territories that had previously been listed as not recommended for human vessels. Recommended status had changed. Dora had changed it, one careful path at a time. Captain Osei retired on a Tuesday in the 2nd year. His farewell gathering was held in the cargo bay, which was the only space on the ship large enough for everyone who wanted to attend, including Lyra, who had to fold herself considerably to fit. He gave a short speech that was mostly about coffee. He did not cry. His crew did not believe him when he later maintained this. Before he left the ship for the last time, Lyra sang something new. Short, only a few minutes. Precise and gentle, the way a carefully placed hand is precise and gentle. The translation program, which had by now been specifically updated for harmonic encoding, rendered it as, "He kept us safe when the dark was long." The new captain, a quiet woman named Fun who had crewed on 3 other ships and understood what she was taking on, watched and said nothing. She had been briefed. She still had not been fully prepared. You could not be. Breck had become a minor political figure. His faction still existed, but it had shrunk to the size of factions that exist mainly to be documented in footnotes. He was recorded, once, attending a human musical performance on a neutral station. He arrived alone. He sat in the back. He left before it ended. The fact that he stayed as long as he did was noted by exactly one journalist, who wrote a short piece that nobody much read. It was enough. On 7 worlds, research programs had been established to study harmonic encoding. On 3 of them, Vorkai, Pelin, and a small outpost colony that had been working on cross-species communication for decades without meaningful results. Voluntary programs had begun pairing infant beings from resonance-based species with human mentors, with consent given extensively and documentation produced in quantities that would have made a small forest feel significant. The results were slow. They were uneven. They were also real. The children in those programs were growing up with something neither of their cultures had words for yet. They were growing up bilingual in a way that was not about words at all. In the Outer Rim, on a route that experienced freight crews called the Long Quiet, a young human captain took a wrong turn. Not badly wrong. just far enough off to be unfamiliar, and found herself face to face with a Vorkai patrol vessel twice her ship's size. She opened the comms channel with her hands slightly shaking. The Vorkai commander on screen was young, by Vorkai standards. He paused. He looked at her with amber eyes that had seen. It was clear, something that had changed the way he saw this particular situation. And then he hummed. For bars. Uncertain. A little off-key. Something he had heard, somewhere, from someone who had heard it from someone else. A chain of sound passing through the dark like a signal. The human captain stared at him. Then she laughed, surprised, short. The laugh of a person encountering something completely unexpected and finding it wonderful. She hummed back. It was not the same 4 bars. It did not need to be. The patrol vessel escorted her to the nearest station. No incident report was filed. No paperwork changed hands. No one marked it in any official record as a moment of historical significance. That was the point. Moments that matter don't always announce themselves. They happen in the space between one sound and another, in the pause where something ends and something else, from somewhere no one predicted, decides to answer. The galaxy did not change all at once. It never does. It changed the way rivers change stone, slowly, through constant gentle contact, through the patient fact of presence, through songs sung in cargo bays to frightened creatures in the dark, through the sound of a voice that did not speak the right language but kept showing up anyway. Lyra was sleeping when the Dawnward Bound crossed into the new route Dora had charted. She slept the way she always slept, fully, deeply, one wing half open, her breathing slow as tides. Remy sat nearby, not singing, just present, just there. Outside, the stars moved the way they always had and always would. But the space between them was not quite as empty as it used to be. Something had been added, something that had no name yet. It sounded, faintly, like a song.